From donating spare change to using your spare time to advocate for change. From making efforts to include someone to creating an environment where everyone belongs. From campaigning for liberty and justice for all to striving for liberty and justice for all. From giving someone a hand when they speak up for what's right to lending a hand as a volunteer. From participating to fully participating. Active citizenship is a cornerstone of democracy. Through its grant-making, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation aims to strengthen both, and we are proud to present a series of open discussions on civic engagement and civil discourse implemented by SNF Dialogues, curated and moderated by Anna Kynthia Bousdoukou, and in collaboration with the New York Public Library, the University of Delaware, and the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. More information at snf.org. Stavros Niarchos Foundation, empowering humanity.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. My microphone, thank you. Okay. Welcome. Welcome and thanks. Welcome to the SNF Dialogues, and thanks for having the SNF Dialogues initiative and the SNF overall here in Wilmington at Delaware. I am Anna Kynthia Bousdoukou. I am the Executive Director of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Initiative, and I'm also the Managing Director of IMED, which stands for Incubator for Media Education and Development. It's a journalistic, non-profit organization. I'm a journalist. So what is this initiative about? The SNF Dialogues initiative started back in 2017 with a very specific and simple goal: civic engagement and civil discourse, which means this gathering of all of you, of all of us here, with experts, they're coming here in a few minutes, and all of us raise issues that concern us all, our societies, and consequently, our democracy. Besides the Stavros Niarchos Foundation team, a great part of the SNF Dialogues initiative is curated by the non-profit journalistic organization IMED, I just referred to, because there is a team of journalists who curate the content and whatever we discuss during our gatherings, during these public speaking events. And I have to tell you that although we started as public speaking events like the one we have today, nowadays the initiative has been a broader initiative, let's say. This initiative has become a platform where you can find, apart from the public speaking events that we are holding, very interesting opinions, thoughts, ideas, through a diversity of formats like podcasts, videos, opinion articles, as I said, infographic, etc. Last week, we were in New York. We were in New York at the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Public Library, where we held the first discussion, the first public speaking discussion of the new effort, of the new initiative of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation in the United States, focused and be centered on whatever we do call civic engagement and civil discourse. And especially with the question if we do mean the same when we talk about civic engagement and civil discourse. So through its support, excuse me for my voice, but it's a long week. We have a summit tomorrow discussing about media and democracy. Not easy topic, of course. So we have done a lot so that we can present to you something which will be interesting, at least, but also useful so that we can start and exchanging ideas, ways of thinking, so that we can fix some things with regards to our role as citizens. That's why we kick off the summit, the Media and Democracy Summit, tomorrow, with the initiative of dialogues, with the discussion that we are having today, because back in September, we were in Athens, we held a discussion and we tried to explore the way that media and the quality of whatever we do call nowadays information. This should also, there is also need there to clarify what do we need, what do we call, and if we need. And the answer from me and from our team is yes, we do need information, but what's the difference when we talk about the news and what's the media landscape and how the media landscape serve us as citizens based on the quality of the information they send us, we send to you as journalists, since I am also a journalist. So then we were discussing about the role of citizens with regards to the quality of the message we receive from the media, and the title then was Spectators or Citizens, which means media and the quality of information finally makes us well-informed citizens and consequently active citizens, or they transfer us being more spectators of what's going on into our home. So today, while we were preparing this discussion, we came up with Tim Schaefer. She is coming in a bit on stage. He joined the discussion back in September. So we came up with the idea, since we're having this summit about media and democracy, why don't we continue the SNF Dialogues discussion when we had this one back in September by getting a bit deeper and explore and raise actually the issue of politics and political campaigns, because we can find also there the role of the media and the connection with the citizens. So we're here as a continuation, but not only. That means that I invite you on our platform, snfdialogues.org, to visit our platform and watch on demand the previous discussion if you wish. But now, today, we will be discussing about if there is an over-commercialization, let's say, of politics, and where do we stand into this environment as citizens. That's why the title, Consumers or Citizens, with regards to the quality of the message we receive from politicians and from the team around them nowadays, with new tools, with new rules, and with new methods, obviously. Our discussion, as I already said, kicks off the Media and Democracy Summit, and allow me to say that this summit is a synergy. This summit is a collaboration, and this summit is a meeting of two initiatives, first and foremost, coming from totally different backgrounds, because the one is the SNF, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Ithaca initiative at the University of Delaware, at School of Public Policy, Biden School of Public Policy and Administration, and IMED. So we're coming, the academic community, the university students, with their specific background on their studies and their expertise, and we, the organization, the team of journalists, bringing up to you and to us, and whoever is joining us virtually. Hi, I forgot you because I have a great company here in Wilmington. So hi to everyone who is watching us online, and afterwards we'll have the opportunity to watch us also on demand. So that's why we are here, to address and also to identify actually the intersection between media and democracy overall, because obviously they're directly connected. Before we start our very interesting discussion with very interesting guests as well, I would like to invite on stage Andreas Drakopoulos, the co-president of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation.
Good afternoon and good evening to all. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all the participants for joining us. Just to say a few words about the SNF, and sometimes even myself, I think of the SNF because I follow football as a Sunday night football, but it's not. It's about the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. So a few words on who are we. We've been around for 28 years after our late founder passed away in 1996. We've been around the world. We've been to about more than 134 countries around the world. We don't have any policy. We don't try to impose anything. We don't try to change views. I mean, we try in a complementary way by supporting our grantee partners. And again, we have actually contributed about $3.7 billion, which is a lot of money. But more important, we have worked with, again, more than 5,000 grantees in 134 countries. As I said, we have no policy. We just try to contribute to do good. And we do that by trying to find the best possible partners, because we see all of our grantees as our real partners, in again trying to do good in any of the four areas, which is social welfare, education, health and sports, and arts and culture. So as you can see, anything can go under any of these areas. So we are quite spread out. At this point, we are focusing on our global health initiative, which is global, but mainly it's in Greece and in the US. In Greece, it has to do with building three new hospitals. In the US, it has to do with helping a lot of efforts in infectious disease at the Rockefeller University, precision medicine for psychiatry at Columbia. We're working with Childmind Institute for mental health. We think that mental health is something which is going to be with us for the next, not few years, the next decades. And it's something I think that if you can say that COVID did one good thing, for me, it was that it brought out of the box the issue of mental health, that we can all talk about it now in a much more productive way than people were afraid to talk about it, I think, before. So a good friend of mine, Henry Timms, who is the CEO of Lincoln Center, as we were talking about, we talk a lot about the overall polarization around us, because this has led us to engage into this effort, and I'll talk more about that, about civic engagement and civil discourse. So Henry Timms, we were talking about the other day, and he used something which I thought was very smart. He said the algorithmic manipulation of all of us is radicalizing all of us. And if you bring on AI, which is coming slowly but steadily, actually fast but steadily, this whole radicalization and polarization can only get worse. So many times we talk about saving our democracy, however anybody feels about it, politically speaking. But I think it's something bigger here. It's about us fighting for our own humanity. And I think that's a very important aspect. And we are down to the point where we need to talk about civil discourse and civic engagement. You would say, duh, I mean, we are humans, we have to do that. But we have forgotten, it seems we have forgotten how to do that. So I think it's a very important thing. And again, our two important outreach vehicles are the Nostos Festival. We do it every year. We're taking a year off this year. And the SNF Dialogues. We're very proud of the effort of our SNF Dialogues team, led by Anna. And it feels like being in a theater, that the SNF Dialogues are on a tour. I mean, we used to do them in Greece, and we said, let's try to go to the States. So we did it in New York about a month ago. We came here for many reasons, but also because of our relationship with our partner grantee, SNF Ithaca, and because of Miss Valerie Biden Owens, who's been a great friend of ours, has been to Greece, has been to our Nostos Festival, has been to the IMED Summit. So it's the least that we can do to come here. So as I said, I mean, this is the second SNF Dialogues we're doing. We're going to do the third one in Baltimore in November. I want to say special thanks to three partner grantees of ours, and they're here today: Harry, Sigal, and Timothy, from Penn, from Hopkins, and from University of Delaware, from the Biden School. Again, we see all of our grantees always as our real partners. We are just passive funders, but we try to get to engage, and we believe a lot in good collaborations with a common cause, and we believe in like connecting the dots. And I think that tonight's event is a wonderful prelude to what follows tomorrow and Friday with the IMED Summit, talking about overall the role of media. And I think, you know, it's an old saying that the pen is very powerful. And whether the pen is physical or whether it's digital, it is very powerful. And it's not a coincidence that it's called the fourth estate, but more about that tomorrow. So I wanted to thank you all again for coming and all the participants, and I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And since you mentioned also the summit tomorrow, I have to say that the fourth estate is something that will be one of the pillars of this summit, exactly because there is a very big question where the orientation, finally the role of fourth estate is right now. But excuse me, I'm a bit more influenced because I'm coming from Greece, very low rates with regards to freedom of press. But this is a discussion for tomorrow. Before I invite on stage the three speakers, Timothy, Harry, and Sigal, let me explain to you how this event will go and the flow. So we're having two panels of discussion. The first panel, which will feature exceptional figures from the political and social sciences, like the three academics, they're coming right now on stage, aiming to frame the subject and explain its significance. Right after, the second panel will follow with two masters of political campaign management who will share their experiences in the field. During our discussion, whoever follows SNF Dialogues is already aware of. For the new attendees, keep in mind that anytime you can send us through our application, through our app system, your questions. That's the reason why I'm having also my mobile with me on stage so that I can check the questions on the app which is dedicated for this discussion today. And that's the reason we created. And of course, if you would like to just raise your hand, there will be session with Q&A. You can ask whatever you want, the speakers, or just share with us your idea, your thoughts, your disagreements. Of course, that's the power of dialogue. And I hope that you will find these discussions really interesting. And I would like now to welcome on stage Timothy Safer, Director of the SNF Ithaca Initiative, and Stavros Niarchos Foundation Chair of Civil Discourse at the University of Delaware's Biden School of Public Policy. Hi, Tim.
Yeah.
Harry Hahn, Inaugural Director of the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Welcome, Harry. A week right after the US elections, we will be in Baltimore discussing about the role of the universities, based, of course, on what we've noticed the last couple of months. And Sigal Ben-Porath, Faculty Director of the SNF Pedia Program at the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome, Sigal, please. So let's start the discussion, and me to talk less, so that we can hear you. So let's start with a question to all of you. I would like to ask you how, if you agree, first of all, that politics has been over-commercialized. Yes. It should be
okay.
on. It is.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I think politics has been commercialized, in my view, in a few senses, but the one important sense that I would like to highlight is that increasingly the effort in political campaigns and in the information and guidance that is coming to citizens from political parties and entities is a message that is based in an effort to turn up or down citizens' involvement in politics, right? So increasingly, politicians, campaigners, are focusing on a certain segments of the population, thinking about us as particular types of people, soccer moms, I don't know, various other groups, members of our religious or racial groups, members of certain types of areas of living, like suburbs or exurbs, rural folks, etc. And the effort is to turn up or down our interest in participating as political actors. And in this way, it's similar to consumerist or companies' efforts to turn up or down our interest in purchasing certain goods, in participating in a certain commercial activities, etc. And so the thought of citizens as more or less engaged based on the political campaign that they are exposed to, and as it relates to the segment of the population that they are a part of or identify as belonging to, I think in this sense is commercializing politics and reducing what should be our even an ongoing commitment to democracy as citizens.
Is this on?
It should be.
It turns, there it is. Okay. Hello. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really excited to see everything that unfolds over the next couple of days. On your question, I think the answer I would agree with Sigal in the sense that one of the things that I feel like we've always known from the earliest days of democracy is the idea that democracy is something that you do, it's not something that you have. And one of the challenges with the way democracy is practiced right now is that people treat it like it's something that we have. Not necessarily, and I'm not faulting the people here necessarily. I think it's more that we have a political system in which, as Sigal was describing, people aren't given the opportunity necessarily to learn the habits and the skills that they need to really make democracy work.
So that they can be also active citizens, so that they can be, so that there can be an interaction actually.
Exactly, yeah. So one of the things we've known, right, is that, we don't come out of the womb knowing how to be good democratic citizens, like engaging in civil discourse, being tolerant of opposing views, working with people who are different from us. All of these are things that are really hard to do. And so people need opportunities to learn those skills. And so in the same way that we have to go to the gym to exercise our bodies, we need gyms to kind of exercise our capacities for democratic life. But a lot of those, I think, have been hollowed out or emaciated in different ways throughout American history. And so as a result, then, what ends up happening is that, people experience democracy as something that they have, in the same way that I might go to the grocery store and buy cereal and decide if I want, Cheerios or Chex or something like that. And it's not something that I do where I'm actively getting to shape the choices that I have before me. I'm actively getting to, discuss what it is that we might want in our cereal or, in the communities that we inhabit and so on and so forth. And so I think a lot of the things that, I want to think about this question of where are the gyms where people go to learn the habits of discourse and dialogue and debate so that they can be better citizens, and not just consumers of the system that we have.
Before I give the floor to you, Tim, while I was hearing you, Harry, now, I came up with one very, very exactly to the topic question with regards to the university nowadays on what you asked. And I would like just a comment from you. especially, and I'm referring obviously to what's going on here in the States the last couple of months and all these things that are going around, how necessary is, and finally, actually, it would be necessary to be already there, but at least how necessary now it's universities to find similar impactful processes instead of what we did witness.
Right, absolutely. I think universities have
all of you to, yeah.
Yeah, I think I would sort of agree with the sentiment that I think underlies the question, which is that universities absolutely play a crucial role in being sites of civic education and capacity building for all kinds of people. But universities, I think, aren't alone the only institutions that should be doing that. You know, we want to see more of that in our K-12 schools, but we also want opportunities, I think, in the community for people to develop those kind of habits and those skills. And, you know, I'm sort of the mindset in the same way, if we think about the ways in which we exercise our bodies, we all want to live in places where there are lots of green spaces and there are parks and it's easy to find healthy food and it's easy to go to the gym. You know, we want to have lots of those kinds of opportunities for people to exercise the muscles of democracy in the same way, of which universities, I think, can play a leading role, but we don't want them to be the only place that that happens.
Yeah, and if I might just add to that, and thank you for the opportunity to be in this conversation. I'm thinking to the first SNF Dialogue, this series was at the New York Public Library, right? When we think about spaces, where are those venues, universities, classrooms, but our campus not far from here at the University of Delaware, the Green, right? The spaces where people can show up together, sometimes collectively, very informally, are really important. I think to your first question, you know, the thing I'm thinking actually about a sticker that's on my laptop. One of my kids was just making a comment about that. He's learning to read, and he just reads everything. And it says, "I voted." It's an old election sticker. And your question made me think of this, is that fundamentally we need to think about citizens as citizens. And what I mean by that is, so often in politics, when we talk somewhat of this kind of consumeristic language, it is about that preferencing. You know, Sigal, you were kind of mentioning some of this before. It's almost going to the store. But how do we think about people not simply as kind of ticking a box for a choice, but in this kind of deeper sense of making some choice that is in a way collective, it's relational. We just turned in final grades yesterday, and one of my classes that's connected to SNF Ithaca, the book we read is titled "What Should We Do?" And some of my students, I think somewhere in this audience, would probably have a laugh because I say that all the time, but we need to think about that question. What should we do? And I think this is where we have an opportunity in higher education, but not only here, to think about how do we help cultivate and sustain these practices, because this isn't, to Hari's point, this is not something that's innate. This is not something that we just know how to do. We have to practice, and practice implies that it's not always perfect. But it does get back to your core question of how do we move beyond this kind of consumeristic frame. If we think about our collective challenges simply as me kind of putting my vote out there and wishing for the best, that's only going to get us so far.
And if we all agree that there is this over-commercialization of politics, could you help us understand, if you have, of course, the answers, if marketing techniques, let's say, have made us so much unable even to identify the differences between the commercial products and the clear political message?
Right. I think the way that campaigns are run sometimes does blur the line between a commercial effort and a political effort. And sometimes politicians are packaged and presented and polished and, marketed as a commercial good. But I would also note that, and this relates to the quick conversation here about higher education, about universities as well, we have to model a commitment to facts and truth in a way that is not always underlying our marketing of consumer goods, right? When you want to talk up about your checks or your Cheerios, in your example, Hari, of course you have to be truthful, but you can still present your consumer good in a way that is overstated, in a way that is trying to create the need or the interest in it. And I think as citizens, we need to be wary of that. We need to be aware of that. And we need to make sure that we are clear in our minds about what kind of good is being sold or presented to us. When universities are engaged in cultivating the habits that Tim was talking about regarding civic engagement, universities have to weave that into their main commitment and mission of cultivating true knowledge, right? And so we need to not divorce the connection between our commitment to truth and facts. As universities, this is our main mission. We are looking for knowledge and truth and to expand our social capacity to understand the world. Our commitment to civic engagement has to be tied up with this commitment. And so it has to be distinct from these more like marketing or campaigning efforts that are not committed to necessarily being based on or reflective of our knowledge and truth about the world. Because in universities, in the US, less than half of each cohort goes to university at all. Higher education cannot be the main or only engine for civic engagement, right? We need more, like you were saying, Hari, but we need to model this way of committing to truth and facts in our political efforts.
Go ahead.
Okay, here comes the dialogue part, right? I guess the one quick thing I would say there is one of the things that, particularly for higher education, is that at the heart of what we're doing is posing this question that often is going to come back to, like, it depends, right? And it's the nuance, it's the complexity, which does not fit in the 30-second ad or the very brief clip that is the way that we appeal when we are trying to get people or those who are lobbying to get people to vote in certain ways. Like, this is one of those inherent tensions, because it does take time. It does take conversation and thought and reflection. And even then, it might still be ambiguous in some way. So I think this is inherently one of the big challenges, especially as you're mentioning, for universities, for us to wrestle with this issue.
I can easily turn this discussion on universities. Please, I know that I started that, but I agree and I disagree, or I would like to get deeper so that I can understand. Because yes, there is a huge need of knowledge and education, but what do we call knowledge and education, and how do we insert on this environment the discussion, the different approach, and actually based on the backgrounds of all these experts coming from the universities, tomorrow's leaders, how do let them express themselves without keeping this black or white pattern in a democratic way. So it's all about democracy, but we should do, and not just say, as you said, Hari, that we have democracy. Please join all of us in Baltimore. So
That's right.
let's go, because this is it gets me very nervous, because
It's the clock.
we have the clock here. Yes. Let's get back to our to today's discussions because this is also the period here in the US. It was the same period a year ago back in Greece, talking about the over-commercialization of politics. And I would like Timothy to take a step back and ask you if you can explain the origins of political advertising and discuss its evolution over the years.
Well, that's a big question.
Yes.
And I'll have some things to say here, but I will also, temper this with an acknowledgement of like, this is, I think all of us, we exist in ways that intersect with these core kind of questions, but it is, not squarely our academic spaces. So the question is, kind of some of the origins of this piece, as we think about kind of political campaigns and advertisements. This has changed over time, right? As we really think about, really here, particularly in the United States, and for some in the audience will have experienced these transitions of how we have these kind of pivotal moments, the Nixon Kennedy election, for example, that was shaped pretty dramatically by a television screen, in contrast to what people heard, right? As we think about the way that messaging occurs at different times, or the fact that someone like, as we'll hear tomorrow during the summit with Douglas Brinkley, about the ways in which people like President Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, were able to be elected at times because they were not as seen in certain ways that we would look in a kind of critical way today. And so as we look at these evolutions of what it means to campaign, even when we're looking at the current election cycle, right? What does it mean right now when we have our candidates presenting as they are, right? Two individuals who are being judged by how they're walking, how they're saying things, these sorts of things. These are, I think, repercussions of this kind of commercialization, or of the ways in which we attack some of these issues or the people without the substance, what's behind it. So it's the superficial. I mean, this is the kind of consumeristic piece that's very concerning to me, is like, what fundamentally are the core questions that we're thinking about in political campaigns, rather than the kind of more performative aspects. But we've seen this long evolution to where it has lined up in many ways, I think disappointingly, with our evolution of technology, of devices, our ways of communication and receiving information that have kind of truncated and shrunk, I think, the substantive components down of who these people are, what are their platforms. We don't often, particularly in the United States, use that sort of language. We don't often talk about party platforms. We're talking about more of the sound bites, what's going to be good for this audience, what's going to be kind of appropriate here. And so when we talk about this breadth and development of this whole arena, and we're going to hear so much more about it from the real experts here in a little bit, but like this is our challenge, is that we don't exist in a place, to your point, Sigal, about universities, the kind of slow, thoughtful interrogation of issues. We are really navigating an environment that is shaped by seconds rather than days or hours.
Can I just weigh in here for a second? So just on this question about the rise of political marketing and stuff in campaigns, I mean, I think one way, and I don't know if my panelists would agree with me here, but I think we have to, there's also benefits to the fact that we have these marketing technologies. And one of the, I think, origins of political advertising started when candidates were trying to reach more voters, right? And advertising at scale enabled them to like go into people's homes in a way that they never were able to before. And at first that was amazing, right? It was great that all of a sudden candidates would have direct access to the people that they were supposed to be representing. And I think there still is a lot of benefit to that, right? But the challenge in my mind is not so much, if we have it, like I think it's a necessary part of trying to run a democracy at scale, is being able to reach all kinds of people through the mass marketing technologies that we have. But it's more a question of, is it the only experience of politics that people have, right? And if the only experience of politics that people have is an advertisement that they see on their TV or in their social media feed, and then they go and they vote every 4 years or something like that. That's a very thin experience of what democracy and politics can be, that leaves out, I think, room for a lot of the things that Sigal and Ben and Tim were talking about. And so in a sense, to me, the question is not just, is marketing good? Like, I think it's an important part of politics, and it's here to stay. The question is, can we build the kind of transformative experiences alongside it that enable people to learn the capacities and the habits of democracy that we need?
And not like being just spectators.
Exactly.
As I said earlier, yeah.
Right. We don't want people to just...
Exactly, because they become passive at all. I mean, this is not citizen being.
Right.
Sure.
If people only experience politics as a matter of spectacle, then, it's no accident then that, our forms of expression get increasingly more extreme.
And if we want to really go back, we'll talk about some of the history of this, like think about the Lincoln-Douglas debates, right? You're not talking about going back to some drawn out version of people having those sorts of interactions, right? I think this is the space in which we don't want to lose people, right? So we do want to use the technologies. We do want to be able to communicate and share information, especially now when we are dealing with so much misinformation, right? The kind of the stretching of the truth. This is so important to be able to respond to those things when it's so easy to have the kind of deep fakes and everything else that are shaping our contemporary kind of moment.
I will come back to the technology because it's a very big elephant in a smaller room. But because there is also one algorithm which has its own role, that's why I described it like this. I would like to get back to one of our preparation calls that we had the previous week before we have this discussion here, Sigal, because you mentioned something very important, at least to my opinion, that nowadays it's a common belief that political discourse, you said, tends to address emotions and has become more sensational. Is this a byproduct of the commercialization of politics?
Yeah, I think if you consider the historical developments that we just talked about now, they have incorporated in them an increased role for affective formation, right? For like developing in you certain emotions that would make you operate in certain ways, right? And typically political campaigns would suggest or assume that activating anger and fear are probably the most effective ways of getting people to participate or to act in ways that are beneficial to you as a campaigner or marketer, right? And so we are thinking about the political discourse increasingly in affective or emotional terms. And as a result, there are more opportunities. So I want to agree with Hari, right? It's completely true that this is also democratizing in a way, right? Like people have emotions and you address them and you respond to them, right? And if you use marketing techniques, you reach more people. I mean, these are definitely positives from a principled democratic vision or perspective. But I think the treatment of people less as agents to be voicing, expressing their perspectives, and the more as a subject of manipulation through emotional activation. I mean, this is the concern that I see in these efforts, and particularly, this might be a bridge for you to the discussion of algorithm, but that you mentioned, Anna. Particularly when we are micro-targeted based on our prior actions, right? So if the campaigners are familiar with things that you previously responded to or addressed in your activity online, and they, for example, assume that you have a sense of concern or fear about a certain topic, or maybe even worse, that you have some negative or bigoted even perspectives about a certain group or a certain topic, and they can really activate you, right, by exposing you to negative information or misinformation about groups that you already might, be considered to have a negative view of, right? And so the incorporation of emotions into the marketing efforts, which again is a typical and is not in and of itself a negative, I think is being utilized increasingly in a way that targets our not the better angels of our nature, right? But instead our more negative emotional responses.
Very quickly, do you find any other, any positive side or any other positive overall to whatever we're discussing today? Is it only bad, the commercialization or the over-commercialization, and how it might work sometimes?
I think I would just sort of go back to this idea that there's a certain commercialization I think that is necessary in a modern democracy, especially one that in a big heterogeneous country that's as large as the United States and many other westernized democracies. And really the question is the only thing that politics is about is selling products that people want and activating their latent desires, And if that's what it is, then they never have the opportunity to kind of learn what their better angels are. This is picking up on Seagal's, quote, like I love that Madison quote, what is government but the greatest of all reflections of mankind? If men were angels, no government would be necessary, And so it's like the reason why we need our political systems is to help us find and reach for these things. And so that's not the purpose of political campaigns. That is a big part of what democracies do. But there's also these other parts of the system that we want to make sure we activate.
I was coming to you anyway. So I wanted to ask you, how is this influence of political advertising reflected in the relationship and consequently the interaction between politicians and citizens?
Well, so actually, this is a nice segue. From that last comment, Ari. I think you're right. We don't want to forgo the environment in which we live. Right. I think we have to acknowledge an element of this. We can't. Three of the four of us are professors by day, right? And we hear students all the time. I hear them all the time say like, "Oh, I'm not into politics. I don't want to talk about this." And I think there's an unfortunate distance of thinking about political issues from the things that they care about, they want, the things that entertain them, that give them joy, that consume them, right, in various ways. And so as we think about, say your question again.
How actually the influence of political advertising reflected this interaction between politicians and citizens?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So this becomes then, I think, one of both the opportunities, because these politicians can reach out and engage with targeted people in some ways. It reduces that barrier that otherwise feels really distant of this idea of a politician or a political party being able to reduce that barrier from them in some sort of elite way to those who are in communities, right? In places like Wilmington, but in places around the country that are not, right? In all of these environments. And so leveraging, I think, the technologies that allow them to reduce those barriers are a really important thing. And if part of that is making these appeals that helps them even feel more connected, is really important. So like, we don't want to lose, we can't change the world in which we exist. We can tweak. And I think, speaking to what we were talking about earlier, if we have these models, these practices that allow us to see our political concerns being wrapped up in larger kind of collective issues and challenges, then I think that helps particularly young people, but not only young people, see these as critical issues and questions that are relevant in their lives that otherwise feel like, I don't want to talk about that.
I'm getting back to you, Harry, and to the role of technology. And of course, we know very often technology, not always, but very often offers access, for instance. And then you have to figure out access to where. But let's don't get there. Let's see what happens when the threats are coming and they might be invisible, exactly because you're dealing with the algorithm. And I think that we are already experienced on what algorithm can do. We also have, especially in Europe, and very well-known scandals. Is there any protection actually for the citizens? Is there any gap on behalf of the institutions to face this kind of threat? Where do we stand?
Yeah, I think the question of technology is really interesting, partly because the technology is changing so fast, right? And so I think that's one of the real challenges that we have right now is the gap between the ability of policy and regulation to keep up with where technology is going. It's almost like it's a constant. I can't do this with the microphone. It's a constant race, right? That goes back and forth between those two things, and so. I like to sort of step back and say, okay, what are we really trying to solve for here? Well, you know, one of the things that we've always known from the earliest days of democracy is that not all civic spaces where people engage with each other are the same, right? And so if we think about the role of the civil society, for example, in the Weimar Republic, civil society was very robust and very thick. And it was at that point, it was a carrier for Nazism. Right. And so obviously we know then that civil society can be a carrier either for democracy or authoritarianism. And so the question in a way is, how do we design the spaces within which people interact to make sure that we're promoting the kind of pro-democratic behaviors and attitudes and capacities that we want? And I think that was the big mistake of the first generation of social media, where we just designed all these spaces without thinking at all about how you sort of guard against authoritarianism and instead promote democracy. And so what I'm really encouraged by is when I think about, when we're part of the conversations with people who are thinking about this current generation of AI, they're trying to think, I think, a lot about those questions of design, right? Like we know that regulation is not going to be able to keep up with, I mean, we need some kind of regulation. I'm not saying that that's not necessary, but I think it's not going to be the totality of the solution that we need. And so some of it's going to have to be baked into the algorithms of design of the technology itself. And I think that's not inconsistent with what we've known about our civic spaces too. I think we need to do that both online and offline, and so on. So.
I'm also taking the app. There is one question which says, and thanks for this, it's anonymous, so it says, in an era where data analytics and targeted advertising dominate political campaigns, how fair are the elections?
Well, I mean, I think people are inherently vulnerable to manipulation, right? And that is true in retail politics, you know, in face-to-face interactions, and it's true in mediated or technology-based spaces. So while, you know, as I was suggesting or worrying just a few minutes ago, you know, we can be targeted in a way that activates our emotions, you know, and so therefore, there are additional risks in these contexts. I think elections are still reflective of the kind of views and perspectives and goals that we learn to develop. And so what needs to be cultivated in these contexts is not only just, as I completely agree with you, Hari, the effort to regulate or to ideally shape the platforms themselves in a way that enables more authentic interactions, but also the capacity of citizens to express their agency in effective ways, right? And that can be direct or it can be mediated.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that just to add on to what Sigal would say, I think one of the challenges with data analytics is that it assumes that the past is always a good predictor of the future, right? So that the way that I behaved or the way that people like me behaved in the past is a good predictor of how we're going to behave in the future. Now, in many cases that is true, but there are also many cases that it's not true. And in fact, I think given the kind of turbulence of politics that we are in right now, we're in a situation where it feels like there's a lot of things that are up for grabs. You know, demographic groups that There's just a story about, I think Biden was in Philadelphia today, weren't they? Like the Biden-Harris campaign was in Philadelphia today, trying to sort of reinvigorate the African-American vote for the Democrats, right? In a way that they haven't had to in the past, because it used to be that your identity was a good predictor of your future, but it's not necessarily true in the moment that we're in. And I think there's also a normative question to ask, where even if it is true, do we want to behave that it's always true, right? Do we want to build our political systems on the assumption that if I went shopping for, new shoes yesterday, that means I want new shoes tomorrow? Like maybe I actually don't want new shoes anymore because I already bought them, right? And so I think that there's some assumptions that we want to just question, and then think about how do we design the technology to sort of accommodate people's changing preferences and changing identities in a way that won't lock them into categories that aren't productive for us in the long run.
I think, just on this data point, like really helpful information, but it's not a replacement of the more relational kind of dimensions as we think about what at the core politics is about, right? This, truly the polis, right? The sense of citizens and place and relationship. So great indicators, or potentially, right? But if we only stop there, then I think it pushes us back to your question earlier, Anna, about how much do we really have this kind of consumeristic framework that it only positions us. I mean, I bought some new shoes not long ago, and all I see is shoes. Like, I don't need another pair. I'm good. But like this truly is, I think, like a quick shorthand, right? It's the more transactional way of thinking about political life that I think is fundamentally more detrimental for us if we're trying to get at these kind of underlying issues, especially in our environment where there is such distrust in institutions across the board when we talk about politics, elected officials, and everybody else.
Please, if there is any question from the audience here, that's the time to ask the three academics. One more question through our app. It says, who is to blame for the fact that people vote by mostly hoping towards individual gains rather than the common good?
Well, so I will say, I mean, it's a very complicated question, obviously.
And you have 30 seconds.
We have 30 seconds. Okay. Here's what I would say. I think a lot of times people think about that as a demand side problem, and I prefer to think about it as a supply side problem. So to me, the demand side attitude is to say, what's wrong with these people? Like, why are they just voting in their self-interest? Like, why can't they think about the rest of us, right? Which, fine, that's probably part of it. But the question I would ask is, how often have people been invited into the kind of spaces where they learn what it means to be part of something that's bigger than themselves, right? And if we're not offering people those opportunities, then how can we blame them for behaving in the ways that they have been modeled, for all the sort of experiences that they've had? And so I would much prefer to think about the supply side, which is how do we strengthen the flow of opportunities that we offer people and invite them into places where they learn what it means to be part of something that's bigger than yourself, to have to sort of engage with people who aren't the same as you.
And in a way, I would also add that it is meaningful to think about voting in your self-interest also sometimes as an antidote to voting through just thinking about the group interest, right? So maybe when you are thinking about yourself, maybe your family, your children, your needs, in the immediate context. Do I have a park? Do I have a library, like the civic spaces we talked about before? These are, small individual personal interests, but they are an antidote to me thinking about myself only just as a member of a group, and the aggregate interests that really undermine or fail to reflect our common everyday. Oftentimes what is going to be good for my children is going to be good for your children in various ways if I am thinking about it in a personal way rather than in a group way, right? Children like mine versus my children, right? This will serve other people's children as well. So there's a way in which, and I recognize, like the sentiment and the concerns, but I also think that there are upsides to it.
I'll be very quick here. I'm thinking of the phrase mutual self-interest, which becomes really important, is that I don't think we give up on what we care about deeply or what we value, but I think with this orientation and acknowledgement that it has to be with this larger kind of notion of the who are we? And I think that's one of the core questions we have to think. It's always an us and them, and how big do we draw that circle to be inclusive? And sometimes there are really good reasons to not have that circle wider. But oftentimes I think it is more of this invitation, but it is at the end of the day, it is about this practice. It is about the familiarity of even how do we show up with one another. We just all had commencements, right? And one of the students just made an acknowledgement. This is the first time I'm going to get to do this. She didn't do it in high school. We don't have, especially for young people right now, a lot of these collective experiences that many of us would think about as spaces to even show up. They had existed in so many ways in mediated kind of environments. And I think this is going to be a challenge for all of us, is how do we show up truly in collective ways and wrestle with issues and questions that aren't always, especially back to our theme around politics, with just those who share our sets of values and views and beliefs, but also with those who don't. And how do we then talk about those things? Not in some artificial consensus, but to understand maybe a little bit more deeply what it is that challenges us collectively.
Thank you. There are many questions here. This question came from Agilos. There is also one interesting question. It comes from Robin. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, so I would like to give the floor to all of you. If there is any question that you would like to, or idea or thought to share with us. Yes.
Yes, going back to what Tim was saying about, the shoes, not having to want to buy more shoes. I mean, there is within, and I'm coming from the environmental policy arena, this kind of addiction with more consumption being better. And that seems to be true of also with reference to just the political discourse. The more you have it, I mean, just the CNN type of, environment around constant news, and the more the better. Is there a point at where you say actually more is not better? And it's, in fact, there are countries, one of my other countries of citizenship is Australia, where there are limits in terms of your political campaigning itself. So some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of my favorite studies in political science sort of talks about, basically shows that as politics became more transparent, people's trust in politics went down, and so C-SPAN and the kind of idea of sort of constant exposure to what's going on in Congress really came out of a set of reforms in the 1970s when people wanted to kind of get rid of the smoke-filled back rooms where these deals were made, without sort of open exposure to sort of to public scrutiny. And so they created, C-SPAN and other kinds of things where people could see what was actually going on in Congress. And the idea was that sunshine laws were supposed to democratize the experience of politics, which they did in a lot of ways. But the downside is when people see the kind of compromise and negotiation and deal making that goes on in politics, they become less trustful of it, And so, and then there's kind of parallel studies that as we saw the rise of 24-hour news in the kind of 90s, then you also begin to see a kind of concomitant decrease in trust and so on. So I think there absolutely is this sort of tension to be held between creating the kind of transparency that we want so that we can hold our decision makers accountable, but then also making sure that people's experience of politics is not just what they see on TV, and it's not just something that happens in Washington, D.C., but it's something that they can experience as problem solving in their own communities, and so it's having that laddered experience, I think, that is really important to counteract the effects of that increased exposure that you're talking about.
Is there any other question? One more, okay. Hi. Is there any? Okay. We need for the live streaming, please.
Oh yeah, for sure. Sorry, thanks to see you all. You were asking Anna about political ads, and I looked at those in the 2016 election. The fact of the matter is political ads are not political information. They were never meant to be. They're meant to persuade. So when Harry, you talk about the supply side, that's what I was looking at. We can't look at that for information. That's not their purpose. And if we look at that, that's not going to be the case. So that, and even at the beginning, when in the 1950s, when they talked to Adlai Stevenson and to Dwight Eisenhower and to others about having political ads, they thought that was a horrible idea. Once money came into it, Citizens United, once money came into it, then political ads became much more important. And they're going to spend $10 billion. I'm just looking at it today. They're going to spend $10 billion on political ads in the 2024 election. None of those ads is directed at the political, at citizens' discourse. It's just not. And so that's my worry. When you talk about commercialization, that's my worry. I don't see it coming that way. And that's the supply side. That's the supply side from ads, let alone supply side from news.
Can I just jump in here? So actually, I totally agree with what you're saying, and actually that leads me to a point that I wanted to make before, which I think is actually a good way to end in a sense, is that if we see political campaigns that are driven by advertising as the only experience of politics, then yes, that is absolutely not what we should take in as our source of political information. And so alongside that, we have all these questions we can ask about the viability of media and other things that I know that the summit is going to be addressing over the next couple of days. But just a couple comments to kind of reiterate, I think, what you were saying. The first is that another one of my favorite studies in political science is a study that sort of looked at what are the best predictors of campaign strategy as measured by how they expend their resources essentially. And you would think that and they looked at congressional campaigns, so federal campaigns, for Congress. And you would think the best predictors would be things like, is it an open seat? Is it a red state or is it a blue state? Is it, was there a scandal? Sort of different things like that. And the best predictor of campaign strategy was who the consultant was that they hired. Right? So if there's anything that tells you about the commercialization of our political campaigns, it's the fact that the consultants are driving strategy more than the kind of fundamental conditions of the actual race. And so that to me just blows my mind in a lot of ways. And so I think there's a whole kind of normative conversation that we could have about how do we run campaigns in a way that aren't slash and burn campaigns where you win at all costs, where the campaign is having to ask, what is it that we're leaving behind? And that's my favorite campaigns that I've worked on are campaigns that are always thinking about how do we do our advertising? How do we do our outreach to voters? How do we do our field program in a way that asks not only are we going to win on election day, but also what are we going to leave behind in the community when the campaign pulls out of that community? And I think that changes the calculus in an important way.
At this point, I will thank you, but you're not moving, you're not going away. You will sit right here in the first row so that you can join the second panel of the discussion. Is it okay? Because we would love having you also during the second panel of the discussion. I would like to thank all of you for joining the first panel of discussion. Sigal, Timothy, and Harry, we'll see you right here. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So before we move to our discussion with the second panel, and before I invite on stage the guests who will join the second panel, I would like at this point to thank Valerie Biden Owens, because allow me to call her as Valerie, because Valerie was not just a member, but a genuine member of our team, both while we were working on both events, this SNF Dialogues event, but also the upcoming summit tomorrow and on Friday. Her contribution on our effort, on our common effort to address the topic of civic engagement and democracy overall has been invaluable. So with great honor, I would like to invite Valerie Biden Owens on stage so that she can share with us her views on what we are discussing, not just the commercialization or over-commercialization of politics, but on the commodification, I would say, of democracy and our civic responsibilities in today's media landscape, as well as her personal experience since she is the first female presidential campaign manager. So, Valerie, the floor is yours. Yes, I want you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I am Valerie Biden Owens. And I am Bernadette and Robbie, Chrissy's friend. On a serious note, I'm happy to see so many of you here who are actually engaged citizens to discuss and to inform and to debate what is at stake here in America. And I would venture to say what is at stake in much of the Western world. And that's democracy and the role media plays in it. Greece is the home of democracy, so we are very grateful to our partners, Stavros Niarchos Foundation. It took me weeks to be able to say Stavros Niarchos Foundation. I think I finally got it down. And they're hosting this conference with us, and because it really and truly is a very critical point in the history of the world, what we're all going through. And to quote the president, democracy is a choice we make to choose union over disunion, progress over chaos, and truth over lies. But make no mistake about it, democracy is not a guarantee. We have to protect it, we have to defend it, we have to stand up for it, each and every one of us. Democracy is not a spectator sport. It's a full contract activity, not necessarily a full combat activity, which it is becoming. Our two best allies to protect our democracy are our Constitution and a free, independent media. Democracy, which we all know, demands participation by its citizens in order to exist, and we call that politics. And politics is the art and science of learning to live together peacefully in a world with limited resources and to figure out the allocation and the distribution of those resources in a just and equitable way. And we choose campaigns as our vehicles to do that. And campaigns are the candidate, the issues, the information, the media, the voter, who then goes to the election to choose the people who will govern us. Democracy is best when it's built on empathy and understanding and a genuine human connection. Issues come and go. You know, we've all heard the saying, people don't care what you know until they know you care. Hence, all politics is personal. I mean, every policy affects every part of your life. And you know, every life is an incredible act of bravery. Democracy can't be sustained on misinformation and disinformation, on call for violence or flashy ads. We cannot allow it to be hijacked. It thrives when its citizens are engaged and educated. It calls for truth and integrity. And that's where institutions like the Biden School come into play. And that's where institutions like the media writ large come into play in the form of responsible journalism. In the final analysis, though, I believe our elections all come down to character. Now, immediately we think, oh yeah, the character of the candidate. Well, that's a given. But I say it is also your character, the voter. And I would say that it is ask you to take a personal inventory. What do I value? What do I stand for? What's my true north? Do I value principle over party? Do I value patriotism over ideology? It's on you. Knowledge is freedom, and freedom is power. We own them both, so let's use them. My profound words of wisdom. I'm a Biden. I could talk for another 45 minutes up here, but I'm going to be quiet because I am now going to, well, you know Anna, as she has now become more than to me, more than the executive director of SNF Dialogues and the co-founder of IMED. She's now a sister in arms. And once a Biden gets her teeth in your ankles, wherever you are, you're never going to get away. Our moderator, she's going to moderate the next debate with Jennifer Palmieri and Mark McKinnon, who are two good friends of mine from both sides, each side of the aisle. Jennifer and Mark know a thing or two about political campaigns and media. Jennifer served as the White House communications director during the Obama-Biden administration, and she was also communications director for the Clinton 2016 campaign. Mark served as chief media advisor on both of President George W. Bush's campaigns, and he worked with the late Senator John McCain on his 2008 presidential campaign. I've seen them both in action, and they are not to be messed with. I've seen Mark, particularly on the other side of the aisle. We've been up against him a few times, but it's always been a fair fight. He's a man of integrity, and I don't think his judgment is always right on what candidate he goes for, but he is a good, decent man, and that's what we need back in politics. So I will yield the floor to Anna and to enjoy the practical side of politics. Two minted, strong campaign managers, and who will tell you like it is. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Since we're having you here on stage, may I ask you, although you shared the whole spirit about whatever we're discussing today, but your experience as a campaign manager in the field and having faced the transaction and technology's role and all these things that we were discussing, would you like just to share with us, even in one sentence? Yes. Of course. Yes? Yeah. Oh, no, we need a microphone. Yeah.
I can talk.
But we are also live streamed, so we have audience online. But my question would be,
thank you.
Which was your first experience based on maybe your first political campaign?
Okay.
And how did you serve so that you can send the message to the citizens?
Okay. Well, we ought to say this is going to be a long one. 1972, my brother ran for the United States Senate here in Delaware. He was 29, I was 26. He was the first senator that he and I had ever met. And that's the truth. We had no money, we had no influence, we had no structured Democratic Party here in the state, and we had no power. But we had the best candidate, and we had passion and commitment and purpose. And our purpose was for something. It was for ending the war in Vietnam. It was for the continuation and extension of civil rights. And it was for protecting the planet Earth. We were one of the first campaigns, and I couch it with one of them but we were out there for talking about the environment way before anybody else started to do it. So campaigns, all the techniques, the tools have changed. But like I said in the beginning, campaigns, I think, get down to character and being issues come and go, but you've got to. We thought in the Biden campaign that we had to listen to you, the voter, and pay attention to you, so that we could see where we could make things work together. Again, since we had no money, we didn't have any money for fancy brochures, glossy brochures, so we used rag newspapers. We hand delivered from Labor Day weekend to Election Day, 160,000 pieces of literature every weekend, because we didn't have any money for stamps. The way we were able to do that was because the press called us the Children's Crusade. I was a teacher, and Joe's late wife, Nelia, was a teacher. I taught at Wilmington Friends School, upper school, bastion of Republicanism. All good people, all Republicans. They would sooner voted for a Democrat than, well, anyway, they were not, none had ever voted for a Democrat before. These kids came on the campaign because I convinced them that we could learn about politics in the book, or you can get out in the field and do it. They got up every Saturday morning at 6 o'clock, went and delivered these newspapers throughout the state for us, went back and played their game at 11 o'clock, and then finished up that Saturday. And I believe in the end, the reason we won by the astounding margin of 3,163 votes was because of these parents who saw their kid, who wouldn't get out of bed usually until noon, but Mary or Johnny got up at 6 o'clock to go deliver this paper for this Biden. And they said, I better take another look. There's something why my daughter likes him so much. My son likes him. We parents think we teach our children. We do. But boy, we learn a whole lot more from our children. They teach us. What? Did I do it? Whatever you wanted.
I was just curious because now we have to deal with so many different things, even for whoever is already in the field on behalf, involved to whatever we do call political campaigns. And now they're coming, the two guests, to dive us deeper into this field as experts. But on the other hand, we are citizens, and somehow we have to address and identify where the technique stops and the message starts. Exactly because we are into this era.
I think what we do, I think campaigns are like relationships. It's personal. And we went door to door in the old-fashioned way. And we asked people not to vote for us, but I would knock on the door and said, I'm Valerie Biden. My brother's running for Senate. Will you take a look at him? Or Joe, I'm Joe Biden. What do you think is the biggest problem facing the country today? And politicians like you, or whatever the answer, we went around with a handheld tape recorder because we didn't have any money for TV or, again, with an old radio guy. And we asked the people at the mall, what do you think about politicians? I think they're all crooked. Or what do you think is the biggest problem today or what's happening to Red Clay Creek? People gave us their answers, we cut them down, and we played these little cassettes on morning drive. But again, I'm not dumbing this down. Issues are important, but I believe that it's the person who's going to work with those issues and what they're going to do. It's the person that matters, the character. Do you think that person's honest? Do you think they're decent human beings? And maybe I'm naive in that, but you use the issue is the vehicle to show the soul and the person of the candidate.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I can take this. I can. So while we're moving forward, we are ready. Thank you so much. We are ready to invite on stage the two speakers, Jennifer Palmieri, Political and Communication Strategic and Senior Advisor at Emerson Collective. And, okay, Jennifer, hi. And Mark McKinnon, Political Analyst and Media Producer. Welcome both. I'm not sure if this is okay here, but okay, you will figure it out. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Honored to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So
That was good. The little Q&A with Val was good. First panel was great too. We don't get to think about solutions a lot, Mark and I. We just think about.
It's here, the first panel.
Yeah, there they are. We
But
don't get to think about
this-
solutions as much as you
panel-
all do. That was
the
interesting.
The second panel, though, has something very, very helpful for me. They are experts with a long experience in the field, coming from, as experts, I don't know, as voters, but I'm kidding. Coming from totally different parties and political parties when they were involved with political campaigns and not only. But both of them are working together, is that correct?
We have been working together for the last few years, doing a television series, and we continue to work together on lots
Things
of
like this.
yeah, on efforts like this. We're working together to preserve and protect our democracy.
That's right.
That's why I said that it will be very helpful for me. Take it away. I'm just counting now. I mean,
Where should we start?
is this, whatever we discuss, the politics overall, I would say, and the political campaigns and this commercialization, because we received also some messages on the app that they say that even the commercialization is a bad thing of politics when it has to do with our lives, when it has to do with us as citizens. On the other hand, some others say that, you know what, commercialization is part of our lives, we have it here and there, it's not bad, there are also some positives, but when we're talking about over-commercialization, the thing starts being bad and dangerous as a threat for us as citizens. My question, in addition to all the above, is the politics the best show on earth or not?
Well, democracy is the best show on earth, and it's fragile. I mean, I remember doing an interview with Mitt Romney for our show, and when I walked into his office, I started doing the interview, I noticed there was a map on the wall, a long, skinny map, about this size. And I said, what is that? It looked really interesting. There were all these colors that started and stopped and came back in again. And he explained that it was a map of civilization and how they had evolved over time. And there was only one color that was consistent all the way from the top to the bottom. That was China. In the bottom corner, about this big, was America and democracy. And what it showed was just how short this experiment we call democracy is in the annals of time. It's a very, very new and fragile, we're still in the cradle of this thing. And we saw last January 6th just how fragile it is. So, when Joe Biden said he's fighting for the soul of America, we're fighting for the soul of democracy and the thing that makes America what it is. Now, there's so much to talk about, and I'll just kick it off by saying there have been in our history, people say we're really politicized. Well, we're not as politicized as 1860. We killed 750,000 Americans, our own brothers and sisters within our own borders. In the 1970s, it's an amazing number there were 250 domestic bombings over a course of 2 years. There were riots in over 100 cities. 47 people were killed. And these were issues over slavery and over American boots on the ground in a foreign country where we weren't welcome. So, arguably, the issues we're fighting for, we're not fighting over slavery or American boots, a foreign war that we're involved in right now. The problem is that the tools that we have now amplify anonymity. They encourage warfare like we've never seen before because you can do it anonymously, and we've become tribal for lots of different reasons. But the sort of media that you're talking about and disinformation and information, I mean, the problem is that people can't agree over facts. How do you even have a discussion? And I just noticed one fact set coming in today, and this is what President Biden has to deal with, that 50% of the country believe that unemployment is the worst that it's been in 50 years. It's the best it's been in 50 years. But people are getting their information from siloed news sources. And by the way, we have this sense that everything is so polarized and these fringe voices. Well, and that everybody watches Fox or MSNBC. The highest rated audience in MSNBC or Fox is 3 million people. Rachel gets about 5. The 5 gets about 5 on Fox. That's 1% of the country. It's just that the volume of these things is so loud that we have this notion that that's everybody in the country. When we drive around the country and sit down with our families, we know that it's not.
So let's see I think about this all the time. I just thinking about this all the time. And so I'm trying to think where to start even. I think, I don't think commercialization is the problem. As a matter of fact, I think kind of the fact that the country is divided pretty evenly and that kind of outside actions don't seem to affect how people, the people's political views in terms of it's like you're either for Trump or Biden, and it's just kind of set 49-49, and you fight over the very narrow margins. That's almost a rejection of commercialization of politics, because I don't know that political ads matter the way they used to, because no one trusts anything, right? That is the problem, is the trust. And with disinformation and just the internet, it's so easy for people to buy into disinformation. And then I think what's really bad for democracy, and Mark and I were discussing this earlier, this is what authoritarian leaders want, is you just to believe nothing matters, right? So I was looking at
trust nobody, or
to trust no one, to trust no outlet, to think that I can't trust institutions. And when you look at the sort of crosstab polling about African American voters, particularly African American men, Hispanic men that traditionally had been Democratic voters and are now saying they're going to support former President Trump, or at least are not with President Biden right now. There are also people that don't trust institutions, right? So, the professors are nodding, you all. I'm going to sit up a little straighter. I feel pretty good about myself. So that I think, so then when you, it's so wild to me, because not that long ago, a state that was highly college educated, mostly white, and an older population was not a good state for Democrats, right? Well, that's Wisconsin right now. And that is looking like a better state for Democrats than a state that's more diverse. And I think it's because it's like if you pay attention to the news, more sort of traditional establishment news, you're likely to be a Democrat right now. And if you don't, you're questioning institutions. And so it's sort of gone, leapfrog beyond commercialization to, I think, disinformation as being what is really testing us now.
I would like, before we move forward, because whatever you say is very interesting, I would like to get a step back and share with us a few words about your experience. Of course, your background, but your experience. I mean, where do you remember yourself being involved, and you, Jennifer, too, the political campaign, and you felt for any reason that you have to change your strategy using new, different, I don't know, techniques that you might didn't want before, or even if you remember what actually, when and what, based on what, the whole methodology was changed. I mean, is there any milestone where the things started being different?
I got a bunch of them. Do you want to go first? Okay. I have a more relatively recent example, which was 2016. Valerie said I worked for Hillary Clinton's campaign. We went to Hillary when she ran for the Senate in 2000, when she ran for president in 2008. You know, there's, you know, not like, obviously, you know, she won one race, she didn't win the other. But one thing that people also sort of appreciated about her was she could sit down with people she disagreed with and find some common ground, or at least they would respect the fact that she did that. It was like, this is kind of like a Hillary superhuman thing, when we're going to put her in situations where she can do that. And we went to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and it was just awful. I mean, it was protests on the way in. I'm not really, you know, I don't know if there were protests inside the event even, but it was not, you know, we were expecting it's like, great, let's like have her talk to these people. And there was just no talking to these people, because they had been living in, you know, at that time they were living in a Fox universe. It was like, they hadn't been talked to they hadn't heard from, talked to people that were other than Republicans for a long time. And they weren't interested, didn't believe anything you have to say. And I was like, wow, okay. A whole bunch of the country is turned off, is not going to be, you know, this is June of 2016. We weren't going to change that dynamic. We're going to have to talk to and communicate with the voters that could hear her, that were open to voting for her. And that's not how you want to run a campaign, because that really isn't really then about persuasion. That's, you know, and I was like, and I hated that we had seemed to have lost that piece, because, you know, I worked for President Clinton. That was another thing that he was good at, talking to people who disagree with him, winning people over. And it felt like, oh, that's really not what this campaign is going to be about. It's not going to be about winning people over. It's going to be about, let me just drive out as many of my people as I can.
Over the course of my life, I've worked primarily I was a bad songwriter for a while.
No, stand by, stop. He ran away from home when you were how old?
15.
15, from Colorado. He went to Nashville and he became a musician, played guitar with Chris Christopherson. Yeah, exactly. When he was Chris Christopherson, yeah. And actually, and like wrote songs in that venue, and like played with him for years. So that's super cool.
For years, until I realized that I was going to end up as the second act at the Holiday Inn in Wilmington, Delaware, when I was 15 years old. And I went to Plan B, but so I was a songwriter, then I was a journalist, then I did campaigns, then I was a columnist and produced a television show. And I realized a light bulb went off for me when I realized that, you know, we think about culture and movie and books in terms of narrative and storytelling. And then the big moment for me, it was realizing that the same is just as true, maybe even more so for campaigns. You have to tell a story and create a narrative. You ask about what's effective. And when George W. Bush asked me to run the media for his campaign, for the 2000 campaign, I was elated for about 15 seconds, and then I went into extreme paralysis and anxiety because I'd never done anything on that level before, and I was really petrified that I wasn't ready for it. And so I spent a lot of time going and kissing all the rings of all the living people who had done presidential campaigns before, who were alive, and went to the presidential libraries and studied, you know, the first television film, and it was really interesting to see how it evolved over time, because there's real evolutions of what works and what doesn't, because the voters kind of get used to it. It's like a virus in the body. You give them the shot and it works for a while, and then it doesn't work. And the one thing that I realized that was true in 2000, I would argue to some extent is still true, is this. that Valerie and I work for firms that produce a lot of political advertising, and even in the 2000 campaign, when I was responsible for spending about 3/4 of the budget, I was like, guys, I'm not so sure we're getting a good bang for the buck on this anymore. And the problem is that people understand the First Amendment, and you can say whatever you want, including things that aren't true. And by the way, when they see a television ad, they know you're paying for it, and you can say whatever you want. It's not likely very true. So looking at that challenge and looking at the candidate, George W. Bush, I said, well, what do we do? Well, first of all, you have to sort of realize, the assets and liabilities of who you're working for. And one of the assets of George W. Bush, so he was very authentic. One of his liabilities was he was a terrible public speaker. And he was not good reading a teleprompter for ads. So conventionally, you'd write a script and have your candidate read a script. Well, he was terrible at it. He looked like he was reading a script. He was not Ronald Reagan. And so we produced the film for the convention. And, over in a presidential campaign, you have 3 times where you can really move the dial. When you announce your convention speech and your VP pick and the debates. That's when you get
or a June debate in this case. Even before the convention.
But you get lots of eyeballs, so you want to take advantage of that. So I was tasked with when the candidate does a convention speech, there's like a 5 or 10 minute video that introduces them. That was my job. McKinnon, go produce this. And people in the primary know you, but this is when you get a chance to really introduce yourself to the broader public. And so it's like, this better be good. I went and interviewed President Bush and Laura Bush at their ranch in Crawford, and I had asked a bunch of questions. Again, he didn't read a script well, so I would just do interviews and tease out authentic responses and tie those into ads, or in this case, the video for the convention. I asked him one question about when his kids were born, and he just completely mangled it in kind of typical Bush fashion. And it was really funny, and we all burst out laughing, and he laughed, and Laura Bush laughed. And I said, okay, let's try it again. We did it a couple more times till he got it perfect. I go in to edit the film. We get to that point. The mistake happens. Say, okay, get that out. Put in the good cut. And we start to go on. I said, wait a minute. Go back and put in the mistake. And they were like, what? And you can imagine the response when I took this to Karl Rove.
Particularly like the buttoned up Bush campaign.
I imagine the response with Karl Rove and then President Bush is like, wait, what are you doing, McKinnon? We're paying for this. And you're intentionally putting in a mistake. Why would you do that? I said, because it's authentic. Because it's funny, because it's real. People can relate to that. They can relate to that vulnerability. They can relate to that humanity. And by the way, let's just admit the obvious. Our guy's not the greater orator in the race, and let's lower the bar of expectations. And they let me do it. I mean, to his credit, George Bush was really, he was confident enough in himself to say, listen, I know what I do, and I know what I believe. You're the media guy. You make those decisions. You're the guy that does that. And if I made 100 ads for his campaign, he questioned maybe one, really said, Mark, go redo that.
Do you regret, for both of you, for any of your choices?
Any of the choices of people that I've worked for, or
No, any of your choices.
Any of my choices?
Your choices, as the person who was the manager of on this field, the media.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, from your experience, is there anything that you have done that you regret for it?
No, I mean, let me just put this in the category of bipartisanship. I'm trying to give you an example of when you have to make tough choices. I worked for Senator John McCain, who I loved and adored, one of the greatest patriots in our history. And he asked me to work in his campaign. I said, Senator, I'll mow your lawn for you if you want me to. I said, but I just want to say that I'll sign up and I'll be your media guy, but I've met this guy, Barack Obama, and I think his candidacy would be really good for the country. And if you win the nomination and Obama wins the nomination, I would be very uncomfortable being the guy attacking Barack Obama. Even though I agree with you and I support you and disagree with a lot of his politics, I wouldn't be good to be the tip of the spear, and I wouldn't be good at it. I don't think I should be that guy. And he's like, McKinnon, this was a year and a half out. It's like, that's never going to happen. And so I wrote it down in a memo because I knew he'd forget, and I was afraid that I'd try and wiggle out of it after it happened. And sure enough, it happened. So I had to take the memo to McCain and say, Senator, remember. And he's like, God damn it, McKinnon. But he hugged me and he said, McKinnon, thank you for helping me get here. It'd be very un-McCain-like not to honor your word. And so I had to walk on the sunset. But to his credit, Obama sent me a note and said, McKinnon, I can't believe you're doing this. And he said, listen, I know you're not, you're walking away from a lot of money. And if you change your mind, that's okay with me.
Yeah, so that's good. I mean, I have something, I don't know if I have something it's like a specific personal thing, except I think that, I mean, we talked about this before in a call we, did getting ready for this. Like, there's a lot happening in the world, right? Like, there's a lot of forces. It's like, it's not just in the, obviously, Western democracies are wrestling with these questions about disinformation and division and, all of that. And honestly, in the U.S. is in some ways faring better than, others. I mean, President Biden's approval ratings are not high relative to other American presidents, in the last 50 years, but they're higher than most people in other Western democracies, right? It's a tough time. And I think obviously I wanted to, I had a question for y'all. I wanted to ask you all when civics was working well in the U.S. And Valerie and Mark and I were laughing about it behind stage. And we said, maybe like in the 50s. And I was like, right, after we had many decades to adjust to radio, television, gotten over World War II, people understood there was a lot at stake. And we had sort of like figured out how to deal with an explosion of communication the way radio and then television did. More nodding approvals from the professors in the front row for people who can't see. I just wanted to say. So I think we're in the middle of all of that and everything. I know Doug Brinkley is speaking with you all tomorrow, and I saw him speak recently. He talked about how everything's sort of being tested right now. Like we had kind of an agreement. I found differences in the Democratic Republican Party, other than maybe in foreign policy, really starting to narrow in my career. And so then the thing that I would regret is you would blow up one thing to make it seem like it was a big deal. Like John McCain was for $4 billion in tax breaks for the oil and gas industry, and it was like technically true, but I'm not sure that John McCain said, I want to be president because I want $4 billion in tax breaks to the oil and gas industry. It's what his tax plan would have done. And, we made that such a thing. And it was like, I think that that kind of thing where you blow something up, it's not that big of a deal, but you made it seem like a big deal. And then a big problem really does come along and you no longer have the credibility to fight it, which is kind of how I felt flat-footed with Trump.
I wanted to mention one thing that was mentioned by Valerie and some of the panel to just kind of touch on this because I've thought a lot about it recently, which is I think we are in an era of increasingly the politics of scarcity. And when you talk about the 50s, it was kind of like a time where there was pie for everybody. It was good times. There was lots to go around. And when we touched on the fact that what's happening in the United States is not just happening here, it's happening around the world. There's just an increasing scarcity of you name it. I mean, there's less of it. There's less pie to go around. And so I think a lot of the debate right now, or a lot of the evolution right now, I think we're right in the middle of it, and I don't know where it's going to end up, but I think you have some people arguing for what I would just say more broadly, again, you touched on this, the greater good. This is about us uniting with limited resources and trying to improve the lives of everybody. Or you have this sort of new cast of people who say, it's about survival. It's about, to hell with the common good for everybody. It's about survival for our team. There's only so much, and we're going to take it. And we're going to win. And then it becomes very kind of tribal and it's like we're going back to the caveman and the fires and hunter and gatherers, and kind of very, human instinctive stuff that's not very rational at all, but more about survival.
That and I just want to blow it up. And Doug Brinkley just walked into the room. Doug, I was just quoting you from an earlier lecture I heard at, why am I blanking? The college in New Jersey. With the Springsteen archives, Monmouth College, about how everything's just sort of being tested right now. We had sort of agreement for a long time. No, I hope I'm not stealing your thing from tomorrow about and everything's being sort of assumptions about what we believe should be regulated and what government should do is being tested now. And I think that there's the people that no, it's too much is changing and I want to keep it. Or it's not working for me, so blow the whole thing up.
Well,
and that is what really scares me.
One question: why your work is necessary?
Why is our work necessary?
And I'm asking that because there is a question which says that at the end of the day, why does making a candidate look or sound better help our democracy?
I think it's what you're helping to do is be a good leader. What you're helping is for people is for, I was White House communications director. The President of the United States communicating with not just the American people, but the world is a huge part of the job. Like telling America, explaining what's actually happening, having America understand who their leader is, having people believe that that person can make a difference. Like, I think that is a very, very big part of the job.
In modern politics, it's the candidate who tells the best story who wins. I mean, it's the candidate who is most successful.
I don't know if that's modern politics. I think it's all politics.
Well, I think
right?
it's just more true than ever.
Yeah.
And it's more challenging than ever when you have, you have disintermediated media. So it's not just 30-second ads on television. You've got to micro target. You've got to use all the resources necessary. But why is it important? Well, it was important for me to tell George Bush not to do traditional ads. Don't read the script. Just be who you are.
Okay, so why, based on what you said and how you both respond to this question, which came from the audience, how can we ensure that the focus on a candidate's appearance or communication skills overall does not overshadow the importance of their policies and actual positions and qualifications in a democratic process?
By who you vote for and how you engage in the process. Like that is how it is on you. It is on, it's on Americans to do this. I think Valerie's story about their first campaign, that's a great lesson in civics. What did she do? She got young people involved in this campaign and they saw that it mattered. And like that is the best kind of civics. I happen to believe, because I'm an optimistic person, I know that Mark is a prisoner of hope, if not an optimistic person, that I think this is a great time in American democracy. We can't see it yet, but I think it's getting revitalized. I go to Trump rallies and I go to Biden rallies, and at both places I find people who have never been involved in politics before, who have never gone to a rally before, who think their voice matters. It's like scary right now, and there's a lot of yelling, but they didn't think there was a lot on the line before, and now they do, and they think that their voice matters. I happen to spend a lot of time in Michigan. A woman there, after Trump won in 2017, she got on a Facebook group, and she's like, apparently she did some research. She's like, gerrymandering seems to be a problem. I'm going to take that on. And then she got a ballot initiative on the ballot, and it passed. And now there's a Democratic trifecta in Michigan because it was easier to elect Democrats to the House and Senate in the Michigan state legislature, because this one, I think she was 26 years old, Katie Fahey is her name. She decided that she was going to do that. I'm not saying that the goal is to elect Democrats, but it's an example of like a citizen deciding, oh, there's a lot on the line. Oh, and that's not just happening in Michigan. That's happening in lots of states. And I feel like either it's not going to work out and this is going to be the failure of democracy, or these seeds are being sown that people are going to participate more.
Well, I love what you said about democracy is not something we have, it's something you do. I think that's a fantastic idea. And to Jennifer's point, it's never been under threat like it has been historically when we learned that on January 6th. But we learned that on January 6th. It's like, oh shit, this stuff's important. We got to fight for it because people may try and take it away. So, I mean, your question is, do some of these things overshadow particular policies? My experience has been, again, getting back to what Valerie said, character counts. At the end of the day, most voters have fairly complicated lives, and they can't sit down and figure out, where are you on China tariffs or Mexican free trade or whatever it might be. But there are ways in which you lead your life that transfers people trust to you, and they'll say, I believe in your values overall and the way you lead your life, the way you treat your family, that make me believe that I may not know, your 20 policies that matter to me, but I believe in the end you'll do the right thing.
And the story you tell about America and where I fit in it, and the story you tell about where America's going, right? I mean, January 6th, so Mark and I used to work on this television show, The Circus, together. January 6th, 2021, Mark was in D.C. with
I was at the speech of the Ellipse.
He was at the speech of the Ellipse, okay?
And John was at the Capitol.
And John Heilman, or their colleague, was at the Capitol. Nobody ever talks about January 5th. January 5th, 2021, I was in Atlanta with our colleague Alex Wagner, where more Georgians voted It's a historic number of Georgians that voted in 2 Senate runoffs. They had a historic number had voted to elect for Joe Biden to win that state, and then they had a runoff, and Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff were elected in that runoff. No, nobody votes in runoffs. Historic number, January 5th. So Alex and I were all excited again for democracy, and then next day, cue to you guys. It was all good. The ladies were in charge.
Over to you, Jonathan.
But that's where we are. Huge numbers of people voting, also huge threat over your head.
Let's move forward and talk a bit more about the funding. The funding is something, I don't know how different it is, and I don't want to do at this moment the comparison, but for instance, in the US, American people, either whoever works in the field or citizens, voters, they're more familiar with the funding and paid political campaigns, etc. In Europe, this is something like a more gray and blurred zone.
You don't know where the money's coming from in Europe.
Not always.
Yeah.
And even if we don't know the paths they follow. So let's get here. I don't think that here the things are the best they could.
No, they're getting worse, yeah.
I would like, in a very few minutes, to make us understand if there is an ethical part to this process. I mean, there are funds, there is funding. Who decides where the money will go? And where is actually, if there is any sensitive line with whatever we do call funding politics.
Yeah. I mean, I think I would love it if you could get money out of politics. That just has never been true, and it's never going to be true. I think that the answer is transparency, and because of some court decisions that we had, Citizens United is the name of the court case in particular, that now makes it easier for entities outside of presidential campaigns to spend lots and lots of money, and you don't know where it's coming from. And by the way, that's for people who are paying attention to laws, right? I have no idea what's going on the other side in terms, it's like there's so much money that gets spent now that is legally hidden from view in terms of who's funding it. It's hard to, and whether there's, and then there, I don't even know what else might be happening, but I do think, I think understanding who's funding it is as best as you're going to get in a democracy.
Well, I'm sort of shocked to hear you say that it's worse in Europe than it is here, because I can't imagine it being any worse than it is here. I mean, the system is as corrupt as you can imagine. I mean, I don't know how you pass any laws to make it any worse than what Citizens United did, the Supreme Court decision that allowed basically anonymous money to be raised by corporate interests, so that we have no idea who's raising the money or where it's coming from. Jennifer makes the point. The important thing, let people raise as much money as they want. Let them donate as much as they want. But let's just at least know who's doing it and where they're giving the money, for God's sake.
So transparency, that's
transparency.
the issue.
That's the key. We just need to know where it's coming from and who it's going to. That's pretty simple.
Yeah, for the history, because I'm not an American, so I don't know very well. I didn't say that in Europe are worst or is worse, the whole situation. I said that we know very few. So maybe they are on the same level.
Some countries in Europe have public financing, I think, which is a great solution if you could ever get that. The notion of getting that passed in the U.S. seems hard to
Jennifer,
do.
I think you're right. I worked for a long time in all kinds of, sort of reform efforts on the finance side. And I mean, talk about a steep hill and a big rock. In fact, that's why I initially supported John McCain, because he was such an advocate for those reforms. And boy, there's been a lot of lost battles on that
Talk
front.
about backsliding. I mean, going from
So I hate to be a pessimist about it, but I mean, to your point, we're never going to get the money out of politics, but the least we can do is provide sunlight.
I'm trying to manage the questions. I have many questions.
I knew you weren't just cruising through your phone.
So no. To be honest, although there are also some messages, questions as well. I would like to ask all of you if you have any question to our speakers so that I can make a choice here for one, because we ran out of time. Yes, the microphone, please. Thank you.
I'm Mike Nelson. I just drove up from Washington, so I hang out with lots of political consultants, but I want to say...
A bit louder, please.
Yes, I'm Mike
Thank
Nelson.
you.
I just drove up from Washington. I know lots
Hi.
of political consultants, and I want to congratulate you on an incredible discussion, and particularly how frank and honest you were. Going back to your discussion about regrets and going back to the summer of 2008, I'm wondering if we could imagine what happened 3 months after you resigned, when John McCain was sitting in a room with people, other consultants, and deciding that Sarah Palin was going to be his VP candidate. A lot of people say that was the start of the dumbing down of our politics. What would you have said to McCain and the other consultants to change his mind?
This is an amazing question.
Yeah, and it's so close to my heart because there's some people that I have really loved in politics, but I don't think there's anybody I love more than Joe Lieberman. And I was on the phone with Joe Lieberman a month ago, literally hours after I had this conversation, a long-ranging conversation about reforms that we needed in life and gratitude, and I got the message that he passed. But it of course reminded me, I was so lucky to have that conversation. I had friends that said, oh man, I wish I could have had a last conversation with him. And I said, I got to. But you may recall that Joe Lieberman came very close to being the only person ever to serve as the vice presidential ticket on both parties. And imagine how things could have been different. John McCain's message, which, by the way, I think was one of the greatest messages. I mean, any successful message for a politician needs to some way reflect who they really are. I mean, the more it does that, the more effective the message is going to be. And John McCain's message was country over party. I mean, what guy other than, a guy who'd been prisoner of war for 7 years and had his arms broken, who could more credibly carry that message than John McCain? And what better message could he have sent than to pick a Democrat, Joe Lieberman, to be his vice president? And the three amigos at the time were Joe Lieberman, John McCain, and Lindsey Graham. And Lindsey Graham, who likes to talk a lot, talked a lot, and it leaked it. And it got out to the press. And then, of course, it got back before the decision was made, and it got killed in the crib because then everybody came to McCain and said, you can't do that, you can't do that. Half the convention will walk out, which I think would have been fantastic. Would have been great TV. America watches, half the party walked out, and they said, McCain cares more about the party than these goddamn delegates. And I think it would have been fantastic. And then what happened was he got in a corner, and again, McCain had his assets and his liabilities. One of the last, it could be kind of impetuous, and he got into a corner, and he kind of said, we're going to throw deep, and for reasons that you can read about in the book Game Change and elsewhere, he made a sort of forced, last-minute pressured decision that had really serious consequences.
Thank you both. Unless there is any other question, I'm happy because I see many people who are joining tomorrow's summit here. Many of them are journalists, many of them are coming either from very close to where we are or other from my country, Greece. So it's very important because when journalists are also involved as political reporters, there is another issue there. How do we learn or how do we convey as reporters the news and the story, or we support the image of the party overall and the politicians, the political reporters overall cover. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks.
Keep the faith, carry on regardless. Kick it hard.
Thank you. Thank you both. So the day tomorrow will be long. Be prepared to join the summit Media and Democracy between the Incubator for Media Education and Development and the SNF Ithaca initiative from Delaware University. We will be here 8 a.m. Then the doors open for the registration, and we will be here with you for sure by trying to figure out what's going so wrong between media and democracy, but so wrong, and even per se, when we have to discuss separately, I mean, either for media or for democracy. Have a good night, and thank you very much.
From donating spare change to using your spare time to advocate for change. From making efforts to include someone to creating an environment where everyone belongs. From campaigning for liberty and justice for all to striving for liberty and justice for all. From giving someone a hand when they speak up for what's right to lending a hand as a volunteer. From participating to fully participating. Active citizenship is a cornerstone of democracy. Through its grant-making, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation aims to strengthen both, and we are proud to present a series of open discussions on civic engagement and civil discourse implemented by SNF Dialogues, curated and moderated by Anna Kinthia Busduku, and in collaboration with the New York Public Library, the University of Delaware, and the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. More information at snf.org. Stavros Niarchos Foundation, empowering humanity.